Okay, so it's been about a month maybe since the last time I was here. Well, that's because a lot of personal stuff got in the way, and like some sad things, some happy things, and I had to focus on those rather than focus on this, which I mean, I think everybody knows, who's here, who's watching, they know how depressing this whole trans thing is. So yeah, it's like having the personal stuff that gets me down, and then on top of that doing the trans stuff, the detransition stuff. It's a lot to just pile on, and I didn't want to focus on it. So now that I'm here, I wanted to come out with advice column, I guess. I wanted to provide, hopefully, some advice for parents with a trans child. And what gave me inspiration to do this was, I think it was 2 months ago or so, I don't know anymore, where basically a group of parents, one of them from the group, who's like, the leader of the group, came up to me and she was like, "Oh, please do this." I don't know what you'd call it. Some kind of Zoom meeting so you can maybe answer some questions from our distraught parents and maybe like try to just shed some more information, stuff like that. And they gave me a pretty good handful of questions, and I tried to answer them to the best of my ability. And I decided that because it was only like exclusive to their group and the people who they're connected to, I decided that I wanted to do my own video on it, but I also wanted to elaborate on some of the points and maybe bring in more advice that I've thought about. I know some of you watching were there at that Zoom meeting, so you know some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about, but stay tuned because there's going to be new stuff. I also want to make kind of a disclaimer, I suppose, of when I give out this advice and these ideas and this information, I want it to be very clear that this is not like a 5-step process. Just do this, that, and then it'll be cured. Like that's not a realistic expectation at all. It's more like you can apply this advice, maybe, and it may or may not work because I have no idea if it'll really work. But I think it's still worth talking about, Also, this video, I'm probably going to be recording it for quite a while, so depending on the length of what the video ends up being, like if it's super long, like an hour, I'm going to try and like split it in half. Or if I just get too tired, I'm going to stop and then do the second half another time. We'll keep that in mind as we keep going. Oh, and so when it comes to the questions that I mentioned, I have rephrased them so it can apply to everybody, because with that Zoom meeting, it was mostly for girls, daughters. And the first question is there anything that can perhaps convince a trans child to reconsider transition? And I know the word convince is a prickly word. The word itself is not dangerous, it's the connotation of it. It's the people who've applied a certain thing to it. And I don't like to think that, convince is an evil word and you're trying to manipulate that person. You're trying to redirect some of their focus onto something a little bit different. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. So my answer to this is, I think when it comes to pretty much any argument ever, you should always do your research on how the other side thinks, believes, and operates. And I would say the very first step before you embark on any of this is do your research. And what I mean by that is look into what transition is to like other people, not just your child. look into the trans community itself, look at the websites that your son or daughter may be looking at, and just collect data. If some of it's on Tumblr, maybe go into the search bar and then like search up trans or transgender and look at all the hideous glory of that of that which the search is, and see how other people are treating the whole thing. What are the things that they regurgitate? How easy is it to get onto the medical path? What do they do? And then they'll look into detransition stuff. Go onto YouTube and search up detransition or detrans, and then find stories, or, you know, search up on Reddit or your favorite search engine, search it up on there, and then you'll likely find some articles and some blog posts maybe about it. And so just look into those. I think it's just very important to gather as much information as possible and look at both sides of what's going on. Not saying look at one side that you don't like to convert or convince yourself that they're right. I'm just saying, like, it's good to have a balanced view of each. That way you'll be able to tackle the problem much better. On the About tab on my, I guess, main front of my channel or whatever it's called, I have a few links that lead to resources for parents that might help you out. For those who are technologically disabled, I'll provide those links in the description as well as other links too. Just make sure to look into those. I would advise, especially if you're really alone with all of this, try to get in contact with other parents and learn tips from them who seem to have grappled somehow with this whole charade. Also try to get in contact with detransitioners if possible. And I think one of the best ways to do that is go on to the subreddit r/Detrans. Also, if you have Twitter, you can go to Detrans Twitter and contact them. I think that's probably the easiest way you can contact them, because for some reason they mostly congregate there. I don't know how available it is, and I don't know exactly how you get in, but I know there's a detransition Facebook group that you can go to and start talking with them and just like get more information and stuff. If it's at all possible in some way, I would advise that once you get in contact with these detransitioners, maybe somehow get them to speak with your kid, especially if they're younger. If you can't do that, try to find detransition videos on YouTube, try to find articles, but I think videos are going to be much more profound. There are some trans kids out there who are aware that if they hear the word detransition, that's something that's automatically and unbased. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but that's how they view it as. They see it as transphobic, bigoted, you know, basically naysayer, lying, charlatan, cult-like, and some of them will be very resistant to the idea of looking and listening to a detransitioned person. So I would try to frame it like you need to know all angles of the situation that you're getting yourself into, and I think that's a very smart and neutral thing to say, because it's just like your kid is exposed to one exclusive and extreme side, and that is transition is really good, it's going to save your life, you're going to live to see another day because transition exists. And they never ever, emphasis ever, see the other side of it that says, oh, you know what, maybe you should hesitate on this, maybe not transitioning won't kill you. It's that sort of thing. Like, if your kid is smart enough, and hopefully they are smart enough, they'll understand that, you know what, hey, I do need a more balanced view of what I'm trying to get myself into, because everybody should know what they get into in anything, ever, regardless of transition. Another thing if not detransition people, if it's at all possible. I feel like it's kind of rare these days. GNC men and women, which stands for gender non-conforming. If they have some kind of online presence, try to go find them. Or if you know some people who are gender non-conforming and they're very happy to be what they are, like, let's say you have like a butch lesbian friend that you know, and she's like maybe like in her 50s or 40s or something, and she's very content with who she is. Or if you have a flamboyant, femme gay guy friend that you know of, or like a cousin or family member of some kind, however you're connected to them, try and get in contact with them so they can talk with your son or daughter and have them like explain how like wonderful it is to be gender non-conforming, because that's what your kid might end up being. Of course, there's also a chance that they're just gonna grow out of it and they're gonna go and do what I did and kind of just present femininely because it's fun, you never know. But I think it's still wise to get on board with the whole gender non-conforming adult thing. It might be helpful looking at, like, if you can't find modern stuff of gender non-conforming people who are happily what they are and not trans in any shape or form, they acknowledge their biological sex and their gender and stuff, and try to go for like 90s or 80s sort of media where androgyny was like really trying to get popular. I also think it's important to keep in mind that your kid feels very likely like an outcast, and so they have been looking at the trans community as a tribe to fit in because they otherwise feel like they don't fit in with anybody else. So they are very highly socially aware, and they have this primitive brain of, if I don't fit in, I'm going to die. So what I would maybe suggest, if it exists somehow, some way, somewhere, I would maybe go for like a support group or some kind of group setting, like a mental health sort of support group for kids and teens. Maybe put them in there, and especially provided that trans stuff is not in there, I think that would be a viable group setting to put them in, maybe. I don't know, that one's kind of an off-the-cuff sort of suggestion. Moving on. The next question is, what can parents say to their child to potentially change their mind? And again, it's not a change their mind aggressively and like force them to go from this to that. It's just more like let's try to suggest something and then you'll maybe change your mind on your own accord. Because I think we should all know that we can't change people. We can only make a suggestion and work on ourselves. When it comes to all this stuff, you can't face it directly. You can't just say, oh, stop being trans. What's the point of transitioning? Why are you so anxious about your body? Like, why can't you just be your biological sex? Why can't you just keep it as it is? Also avoid saying, son, daughter, you're in a cult, you need to get out of it. And you should also avoid saying, this whole gender thing, this is a religion. Also avoid calling it an ideology as well, because this will make your kid get really stubborn and double down, and then they'll like convince themselves even more that they're trans. They'll start resenting you more and wanting to push you away. So definitely avoid doing that. Even if what you're saying is true, it's just gonna backfire. I would instead aim for what is truly maybe ailing your child. I mean, you know your child best, so I think you might be able to know what sorts of things they're struggling with. Usually it's gonna be trouble with fitting in, and there's deeper things about not fitting in. It could be like a mental health thing, mental illness that they're struggling with. And they could be, especially if they're teenagers, ashamed of their sexuality in some way, and not just being homosexual, but also heterosexual, because I am learning that heterosexual people, myself included, have felt shame for our sexuality as well. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. Not just those sexualities, but like fetishes and paraphilia would very likely be, autogynephilia and autoandrophilia. Those are the two main things that are associated with trans stuff. You could be ashamed of that. Sexism, that's a really huge one. General identity issues, which could stem from disorders such as borderline personality disorder. A dissociative sort of disorder where they feel disconnected from their body. Feeling neglected in some way by one or both parents. Bullying at school or from friends or neighbors, whether they're adults or their age. Sexual assault or abuse could also be a thing. Of course, that's something that would most likely very much keep secret, but I think you can kind of coax that information out of them with kindness. There could be other issues that they have, and again, you're the parent, you know them best, right? I think you might be able to piece together what could be ailing them, so whatever that hunch could be, kind of explore that and see where that might lead. More on that when it comes to our kids, and I say this from a place of having such a good relationship with my mom. I have learned that even though we are very much individuals with our own wants, desires, likes and dislikes, and we are completely different people, it's still I have a lot of things that she's struggled with on a fundamental emotional way that I share with her. For example, her having a fear of phone calls. She doesn't work well with those, and I have the same thing. Phone anxiety. She has had phone anxiety, and I have had phone anxiety. That's an example. So I point that out because if we're that close with those, fundamental emotional things, then you and your child have that same thing. So whatever could be ailing you could also be ailing them. So I would say definitely work on yourself and your emotional output. If you can heal yourself, you have more of an ability to help your son or daughter. What worked for me growing up as an adult, looking back, what would have helped me is have my mom express her emotions more. And I know some parents watching are like, oh, but I express feelings and I want my kid to express feelings all the time. But this is my case, and I'm sure a lot of kids might feel the same way. This is what I wanted to see in my mom. I wanted to see some kind of vulnerability in her, and I didn't really get to see that because I mostly saw her be angry and frustrated. So it would have been nice seeing her more vulnerable and just being more tender with me. That's what I would have liked to have seen. At the same time, as I was growing up to be a teenager, I wanted independence and I wanted to rebel really badly. My mom had made me feel choked of that because while she was very distant emotionally, she was also very clingy and insecure. I hated that dichotomy. Even though she was clingy and distant for different things, she was still distant in a way. And I didn't want her to be distant with me. I'm saying that because I think that there's a lot of detransitioned women who've experienced the same sort of thing with their mothers or fathers, where it is that weird dichotomy, but mostly that distance and aloofness with the helicopter parenting part. Well, for helicopter parenting, you need to stop being a helicopter parent. You need to just let your kid kind of just be a kid. And now that I think about it, I think that a lot of these kids are affected by helicopter parents, where they are very clingy and wanting to know where they are at any given time, and they just don't let their kid breathe, and they see transgender identification as kind of that way out. And I think that also fuels their desire to estrange themselves from their family. And you don't want to be that parent. You don't want to be clingy. I mean, I don't know. Have any of these parents ever had like a partner that was that clingy? It's kind of the same thing. You don't want to be choked of, where are you? What are you doing? Why? What's happening? Why didn't you text me right after I sent that text? You know, stuff like that. I think some of us have experienced that in a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. It just makes us want to run away. So again, working on yourself really, really helps. I also think that when it comes to kids and teenagers, they're kind of one-dimensional. I don't know if I've mentioned that before in another video. It's been a while. I don't remember what I say. When it comes to kids and teens, they're pretty one-dimensional in how they perceive certain stimulus. And in the case of love and affection, they want it to be very obvious that you love, appreciate, and are affectionate toward them. I guess love language would also apply here, but basically I'm going to say that they probably want to hear that they're loved by you. They want to see that you do things for them that makes them feel loved. And even just showing appreciation for the things that you like them doing, that also gives them some reassurance that you care about them. Lastly, for this question, when it comes to teenagers, they tend to get really dodgy and they don't seem to want to get to the point of anything. It'll be very difficult getting to the core of their problems. So my thoughts are that you need to show, as a parent, friend, and I guess part-time therapist, is that you need to show a willingness to listen to them. Because, you know, there's that saying of kids are seen, not heard. A lot of the time they just feel either seen or just completely invisible. And being listened to makes them feel like, hey, I'm being valued, especially as a teenager, because teenagers want to be seen as adults. They're not adults. They're not very intelligent or very aware of their surroundings. You know, kids are stupid, okay? I have repeated that many times. Kids are stupid. They don't have proper brain development quite yet. They still want to be treated like they are adults, and I think that's how you should treat them as. Like, treat them like adults, but know that they're very limited in mental things. I don't know how to describe it. I think you know what I mean, hopefully. Just coming to them with, like, you know, like, what's wrong? Honey, what's ailing you right now? Like, what's the problem? Or just some kind of question that doesn't feel invasive, that it isn't at all accusatory or anything intrusive. It should be open, curious, come at it at like a neutral standpoint, and that'll make the kid be like, okay, well, I'm not going to be judged, and I'm not going to be ridiculed for the vulnerable things that I'm going to tell my parent. That will make them feel respected and feel like they're an adult, because one day they are going to be an adult and you want them to know what it's like to be that adult, and they'll deem you as somebody safe to be around. Next question is, and this one's a little bit less of advice and more just, I think it's really good to keep this in mind. Is gender really all that important? And I will say, as a matter of fact, no, it's absolutely not important. I know it doesn't seem like it at all, but your kid couldn't care less about what the hell gender is. They don't know what it is. They don't care about it, even though they say they care about it. That's not the problem. Like I said before, with mental health issues, social issues, the other things that I said, that's the root of it, and that's what you should be paying attention to, not gender. Gender and medical transition, like alcoholism, is a vice, and you can't, when it comes to alcoholics, you can't just say, well, just stop drinking, because they're gonna be like, what? I don't have a problem, get the hell away from me, that sort of thing. So you really can't tackle it directly, because that's not the problem. Next question is, what's the best way to handle someone who's on testosterone? And this is obviously more toward daughters. Duh. I will say right away that your daughter is going to be aggressive, and not in the male aggression, not at all. It's more like a very female aggression. This daughter of yours is going to try to pick fights, and she's very likely going to try to dig into something emotional in you. She might try to pick you apart in a very feminine way, and that's just what girls do. They always go, and it's not a nurture type thing. It's just that's what girls are just biologically structured to do, is aim for psychological things, whereas boys will go into physical aggression. So I think the best way to approach this would be to be firm with your own boundaries. And boundaries aren't things where you try to control the other person. A boundary is something you do entirely for yourself. With boundaries, you're protecting your own feelings. You're saying, this is what I will tolerate in another person, and if they cross that line with me, I am going to remove myself from the situation to protect me. So when it comes to creating a boundary with your very emotionally aggressive daughter who thinks she's a man, you want to assert your feelings, and not your opinions, but like what, maybe your opinions, I don't know, depending on the circumstance, I guess. You want to assert these to let her know where you're at and what you will tolerate in what she probably wants to tell you when it comes to like all this gender stuff. Or if she's just being like emotionally aggressive in general, you want to just make that boundary and be like, I don't want to talk about that right now. Let's change the subject. These conversations on gender just make me feel agitated, so I would rather not talk about this. Those are the sort of things you might consider saying to your daughter. And of course, if she gets like really aggressive and starts yelling, just remove yourself from the situation and be like, I will not tolerate somebody yelling at me, so I'm going to leave. Something like that. Also, when it comes to your opinions, you want to be gentle enough about them, and also your feelings as well. You want to be gentle enough when you express them, where she might not blow up and get like really escalate and label you as a transphobe, then cut you off from her life, as is the modus operandi of these people. Be firm enough with your opinions and your stance on this whole gender thing, because you don't want to enable her in any way, because otherwise it's going to be very destructive. You want to be firm enough to show her that you aren't weak and spineless, because your very aggressive daughter does not want to see you bend. Even though she thinks she wants you to bend so that she can have like power and authority over you, she doesn't actually want you to bend to her will. She wants you to fight back and say, as I've been saying, nope, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to play your game. This is what I believe. This is how I feel. And you're just going to have to tolerate that. That's it. Don't compromise on your values either. And for me personally, I did not like seeing my mom bend to... When I asserted that this is what I wanted to do, I wanted to transition, and I couldn't tolerate her saying no to me for transitioning, I didn't actually like it when she enabled me. And of course I didn't express that, because why would anybody express that sort of thing? But I'm saying, like, I lost some respect for her when she did enable me, and I saw it as weak and kind of pathetic, and I didn't want to see that. I wanted to see my mom be strong and say, hey, no, this is not what's gonna happen. Even if that would have, like, made me dig in my heels, I would have appreciated it, because then it shows that she wants to actually be a parent to me and have what's kind of best for me, I guess. I don't know how good of advice that is, but that's what I wanted, at least personally. This is not to say that I wanted to argue and fight or anything, because that just hurt me more. I just wanted to have a good sparring partner to challenge me. And I'm pretty sure all kids, like even dogs, want to be... Yes, dogs, yes. They want to be challenged as well. If a detransitioner says, looking back, I wish I had been challenged on my views and stuff, it suggests that your trans child wants to be challenged as well. They don't want to admit it because it's an ego thing. They don't want to admit being wrong. And even though they fight back on your wrong and transphobic opinion, they still want to hear it, because again, they don't want you to bend. On top of this, not being challenged at all made me more arrogant and disrespectful to not only just my parents, but also other adults around me. That just created a really negative environment where I just couldn't trust teachers. I mentioned don't compromise your values. I want to elaborate a little bit on that. I mean to say, like, don't compromise on really anything with her, or, you know, your son as well, just to make them happy, because it's not what they want. This gender transition is not what they want, and they know this deep down. Also, I think for daughters on testosterone, maybe this could help. She's also human, so if you express how you feel, how her words affect you, like if they hurt you, tell her that. There's really no way that she can fight that, because you can't fight with feelings, because your feelings are your feelings. They're illogical, they're just there. But at least when you express your pain like that, subconsciously she'll be like, wow, my words really do affect other people. She should know that she's not the only one who can get hurt by words. And that's the thing with kids and teens, is that they still have like this narcissism about them, and everything that happens around them, it must have something to do with them, and they're gonna blame themselves or whatever, and they're gonna make it about themselves, blah blah blah. So this one departs from the questions, and it just goes into the new ideas that I've been thinking about. And I think a good piece of advice is isolation. Isolation seems to work. For instance, ever since quarantine started, I've noticed an uptick in detransition from, you know, mostly young ladies, but young men too. It's quarantine where they've been like pretty much isolated from physically going to school. Maybe they have some contact with social media, but it seems like, from what I've been able to understand, is that they take the time, especially if they're like really introverted, they'll take the time to self-reflect and think about their life choices so far. And some of them tend to be like, you know what, I don't think I care about gender really at all. And so they'll detransition or desist. And so I'm thinking, because that's true, and with my own experience, because I had been with work stuff and having graduated from high school, I was isolated and I was very introverted, so I didn't really have any contact with anybody else, so I had a ton of time just to think about, like, why was this transition stuff so important to me? And I basically just thought about it, ruminated on it, and then came out being like, I don't really care anymore. It wasn't that casual, but you know what I mean. If quarantine doesn't work, then I would say getting your kid or teen to take interest in outing of some kind. I thought like maybe just getting away from the internet in whatever way you can get them away from the internet, and that could be forcing them off the internet. Isolation could be going on some kind of family trip, like maybe some kind of, I don't know, camping trip or big ol' hiking trip, whatever, and yeah, it's some kind of thing where you aren't being on the internet at all, and you're just with the family or some family friends maybe, and going out without the internet and just having a good old time, focusing on, you know, the sanctity of family and whatnot. I've also heard of going to a horse camp. I don't exactly know what that is, but I assume it's going to a camp and you're just like riding horses like on a daily basis or something. Some kind of camp for kids, and hopefully you can find that one that is not pro-trans. Maybe a camp out in the boonies somewhere where it's such a small town vibe that they don't even know like what's gender. You know, just somewhere where trans stuff is, the people don't even know what it is. I think that would be a good place to go, although it might be kind of hard to find. You'd have to do a lot of vetting as a parent. One extreme move that I can think of that you could take is, especially if you're in a very liberal place like New York City or I guess Houston, Texas, Austin, Texas, I think, and pretty much anywhere that is California, Oregon, Portland, Seattle, major liberal places like those. If you live in one of those places, I think you should get your kid and either move out into like the countryside of that state where it gets mostly red, because that's where like every state has a mix. And a lot of the time, the blue parts are in the heavily condensed social areas, and then the red parts go out where it's more rural. Or like if you have a family member that like owns a farm, a homestead, or is off-grid maybe, you could send your kid there, and then maybe they can just like focus on manual labor like farming, getting your kid onto some time-consuming hobby, you know, before they get into college, getting them into a time-consuming hobby of some kind that has nothing to do with gender. And if you're there supporting them and like encouraging good behavior, I think that would help. Activities like gardening, something to do with animals, things that have them take care of something that isn't them. That helps, and it also accesses their sympathy and empathy for something else, because most of the time kids don't like seeing something die, especially if they made it happen. Like when it comes to plants, we don't like seeing the plant die, because then it feels like, oh well, I'm bad at taking care of something, I gotta do better. And gardening for me definitely has helped me access my sympathy and empathy, so I would suggest it for parents with kids who are still living with them who think they're trans. If you can take care of an animal or a plant, you can better take care of yourself. Hiking, as I said, or even dancing, or just something physical where they're not on the internet at all, could let them see that their bodies are perfect just the way they are, and they're here to help you overcome challenges, and to show that, hey, my body is reliable and not horrible. Because that would go into like, yeah, maybe my appearance is ugly, but at least it got me through this hike. And I think there's a lot of value to be had from realizing that sort of thing. And this piece of advice, it's a little bit less about isolation, but I think it still fits in. But I think it would be perhaps a good idea to encourage your kid to get like a blue-collar job. I know most parents are like, oh, gross, I don't want my kid to be a garbage man, disgusting. I think it's worth at least entertaining the thought, because if you go for blue-collar work like a trade school, your kid is far more likely to actually get a job than if he or she were to go into some prestigious university, which is mostly liberal, and an indoctrination station. You know, getting some kind of white-collar prissy job where they're going to be exposed to sensitivity training sort of things. You'd want them to be in a more tougher sort of environment, and that's what trade schools kind of offer. Like more real life stuff, if you will. There's more guarantee to get a job depending on the trade school. You could get a lot more money, and therefore your kid will understand responsibility a lot better, because then they'll be able to likely get a house sooner. And once you pile on responsibility to your kid, they'll have less care about what gender means to them. Once you teach somebody how to be responsible, they're gonna be less like, oh, I'm a victim, boo-hoo, woe is me, everybody's out to get me. If we can teach them responsibility, then they'll be less like, oh, I can't get anywhere in life, I want the government to take care of me. Like, they'll actually be like, I can take care of myself. Wow. And I also think when it comes to manual labor jobs, getting into one's body as opposed to remaining inside the head, jobs that don't really challenge us in some way, especially physically, they prevent us from accessing what our bodies can actually do for us. And they can do a lot of wonderful, wondiferous things, but we kind of just sap out that opportunity to see it with modern life. When it comes to trade schools and manual labor and stuff, there's going to be less people who are going to cater to your son or daughter's feelings. So if your kid goes, wow, what about my gender? What about my pronouns? Take care of my feelings. People in construction work, they're gonna be like, what? No, we're not gonna do that. Shut up, you wuss. Something like that, especially depending on where you live. And with those types of people surrounding, especially your daughter, she will feel inadequate being surrounded by primarily buff, beefy men who are able to lift way more than her, even if she's a couple years on testosterone. Most of the men on average in her workforce are going to be able to do more than her, so she's going to feel inadequate. And also emotionally, as much as she wants to pretend that she's so much like them, hopefully she'll quickly learn that she's not as tough as them, and that will discourage her. And that's what happened with me with my work before I detransitioned. Knowing the value of money and responsibility and how to gain money will definitely make her feel less like a victim, which is something she kind of desperately wants to be, or he, maybe it's her son. I think going into a trade school would be very beneficial. I mean, it's not guaranteed, depending on where you live, but I think it's something to consider. You know what? I'm running out of batteries, so I'm just gonna have to call it off here and do the second part next time. So, catch you later on that second part. Goodbye.